On Grnhw Hill, by Rudyard Kipling. To love's low voice she lent a careless ear, her hand within his rosy fingers lay a chilling weight. She would not turn or hear, but with averted face went on her way. But when pale Death, all featureless and grim, lifted his bony hand and beckoning held out his cypress wreath, she followed him, and love was left forlorn and wondering, that she who for his bidding would not stay, at Death's first whisper rose and went away. Rivals. Oi, da Ahmad Din, Shafez Allah ul Ahu, Badur Khan, where are you? Come out of the tents, as I have done, and fight against the English. Don't kill your own kin. Come out to me. The deserter from a native corps was crawling round the outskirts of the camp, firing at intervals and shouting invitations to his old comrades. Misled by rain and the darkness, he came to the English wing of the camp, and with his yelpings and fire and rifle practice disturbed the men. They had been making roads all day and were tired. Othrys was sleeping at Leroyd's feet. "What's all that?" he said thickly. Leroyd snored, and a Snider bullet ripped its way through the tent wall. The men swore. "It's that bloomin' deserter from the Arabangadis," said Othrys. "Get up, someone, and tell him he's come to the wrong shop." "Go to sleep, little man," said Mulvaney, who was steaming nearest the door. "I can't arise and expate with him. 'Tis rainin' in trench tools outside. 'Tain't because you bloomin' can't, it's 'cause you're bloomin' won't, ye long, limp, lousy, lazy beggar, you. Ark him owlin'. What's the good of argufying? Put a bullet into the swine. He's keeping us awake," said another voice. A subaltern shouted angrily, and dripping sentries whined from the darkness. "'Tain't no good, sir. I can't see him. He's hiding somewhere down the hill." Othrys tumbled out of his blanket. "Shall I try and get him, sir?" said he. "No," was the answer. "Lie down. I won't have the whole camp shooting all around the clock. Tell him go and pot his friends." Othrys considered for a moment. Then, putting his head under the tent wall, he called out as a bus conductor calls in a block, "Higher up there! Higher up!" The men laughed, and laughter was carried downwind to the deserter, who, hearing that he had made a mistake, went off to worry his own regiment half a mile away. He was received with shots. The Arabangas were very angry with him for disgracing their colours. "And that's all right," said Othrys, withdrawing his head as he heard the hiccough of the Sniders in the distance. "S'help me, God, though, that man's not fit to live, messing with my beauty sleep this way." "Go out and shoot him in the morning, then," said the subaltern incautiously. "Silence in the tents now. Get your rest, men." Othrys lay down with a happy little sigh, and in 2 minutes there was no sound except the rain on the canvas and the all-embracing and elemental snoring of Leroyd. The camp lay on a bare ridge of the Himalayas, and for a week had been waiting for a flying column to make connection. The nightly rounds of the deserter and his friends had become a nuisance. In the morning the men dried themselves in hot sunshine and cleaned their grimy accoutrements. The native regiment was to take its turn of road-making that day, while the old regiment loafed. "I'm a-goin' to lay for a shot at that man," said Othrys, when he had finished washing out his rifle. "He comes up the water course every evening about 5 o'clock. If we go and lie out on the north hill a little bit this afternoon, we'll get him." "You're a bloodthirsty little mosquito," said Mulvaney, blowing blue clouds into the air. "But suppose I have to come with you. Fair's Jock." "Gone out with the mixed pickles, 'cause he thinks himself a bloomin' marksman," said Othrys with scorn. The mixed pickles were a detachment of picked shots, generally employed in clearing spurs of hills when the enemy were too impertinent. This taught the young officers how to handle men, and did not do the enemy much harm. Mulvaney and Othrys strolled out of the camp and passed the Orangabandis, going to their road making. "You've got to sweat today," said Othrys genially. "We're going to get your man. You didn't knock him out last night by any chance, did you?" "No, the pig went away mocking us. I had one shot at him," said a private. "He's my cousin, and I ought to have cleared our dishonor. But good luck to you." They went cautiously to the North Hill, Othrys leading, because, as he explained, "This is a long-range show, and I've got to do it." His was an almost passionate devotion to his rifle, whom, by barrack room report, he was supposed to kiss every night before turning in. Charges and scuffles he held in contempt, and, when they were inevitable, slipped between Mulvaney and Leroyd, bidding them to fight for his skin as well as their own. They never failed him. He trotted along, questing like a hound on a broken trail, through the woods of the North Hill. At last he was satisfied, and threw himself down on the soft pine-needle slope that commanded a clear view of the watercourse and a brown, bare hillside beyond it. The trees made a scented darkness, in which an army corps could have hidden from the sun-glare without. "Here's the tail of the woods," said Othris. "He's got to come up the watercourse, 'cause it gives him cover. We'll lay ear. Tain't not arf so bloomin' dusty, neither." He buried his nose in a clump of scentless white violets. No one had come to tell the flowers that the season of their strength was long past, and they had bloomed merrily in the twilight of the pines. "This is something like," he said luxuriously. "What an evening clear drop for a bullet across. How much do you make it, Mulvaney?" "700, maybe a trifle less, because the air's so thin." Whoop, 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 went a volley of musketry on the rear face of the North Hill. "Curse them mixed pickles, firing at nothing. They'll scare off the country." They're a sight shot in the middle of the row," said Mulvaney, the man of many wiles. "There's a red rock yonder. He'll sure to be pass. Quick!" Othris ran his sight up to 600 yards and fired. The bullet threw up a feather of dust by a clump of gentians at the base of the rock. "Good enough," said Othris, snapping the scale down. "You snick your sights to the mine, or a little lower. You're always firing high. But remember, first shot to me. Oh, lordy, but it's a lovely afternoon." The noise of the firing grew louder, and there was a tramping of men in the woods. The two lay very quiet, for they knew that the British soldier is desperately prone to fire at anything that moves or calls. Then Leroyd appeared, his tunic ripped across the breast by a bullet. Looking ashamed of himself, he flung down on the pine needles, breathing in snorts. "One of them damned gardeners of the pickles," he said, fingering the rent, "firing to the right flank when he knowed I was there. If I knew who he was, I'd rip it open the hide off him. Look at my tunic." That's a special trustability of a marksman. Train him to hit a fly without steady rest at 700, and he lose on anything he sees or hears up to the mile. You're well out of that fancy firing gang, Jock. Stay here." Been firing at the bloomin' wind and the bloomin' treetops," said Othris with a chuckle. "I'll show you some firing later on." They wallowed in the pine needles, and the sun warmed them where they lay. The mixed pickles ceased firing and returned to camp, and left the woods to a few scarred apes. The watercourse lifted up its voice in the silence and talked foolishly to the rocks. Now and again the dull thump of the blasting charge 3 miles away told that the Orobangadists were in difficulties with their road making. The men smiled as they listened and lay still, soaking in the warm leisure. Presently Leroyd, between the whiffs of his pipe, "Seems queer about him yonder, desertin' and all." "He be a bloomin' side queer when I've done with him," says Othris. They were talking in whispers, for the stillness of the woods and the desire of slaughter lay heavy upon them. "I make no doubt he had his reasons for desertin', but by my faith, I make less doubt every man has a good reason for killing him," said Mulvaney. Happened that there was a lass tooed up with it. Men do more for their sakes more for the sake of a lass. They make most of us list. They've no manner of right to make us desert. Aye, they make us list, or their fathers do," said Leroyd softly, his helmet over his eyes. Othra's brow contracted savagely. He was watching the valley. "If it's a girl, I'll shoot the beggar twice over, and a second time for being a fool. You're blasted sentimental all of a sudden, thinking of your last near shave?" "Nay, lad, I was but thinking of what has happened." "Ah, for what has happened? Ye lumbering child of calamity, that you're lowing like a cow-calf at the back of the pasture, and suggesting invidious excuses for the man Stanley's going to kill. You'll have to wait another hour yet, little man. Spit it out, Jock, and bellow melodious to the moon. It takes an earthquake or a bullet graze to fetch aught out of you. Discourse, Don Juan. The amours of Lotharius Leroyd. Stanley, cap a growling regiment eye on the valley. It's all along the hill yon there, said Leroyd, watching the bare sub-Himalayan spur that reminded him of his Yorkshire moors. He was speaking more to himself than his fellows. Aye, said he, Rumble's moor stands up over Skipton town, and Grnhw hill stands up over Pateley Brig. I reckon you've never heard o' Grnhw hill, but yon bit o' spare stuff is there. If there was noblest a white road winding is like it, strange like, moors and moors and moors, and never a tree for shelter, and a grey house with flagstone grooves, and pewties crying, and Windhover going to fro just like these kites, and cold, a wind that cuts you like a knife. You could tell Grnhw hill folk by the red apple colour of their cheeks and the nose tips, and their blue eyes driven into pinpoints by the wind. Miners most, burrowing for lead in the hillsides, following the trail of those their ore veins, same as a field rat. It was the roughest mining I'd ever seen. You'd come on a bit of creaking wood, windlass like a wellhead, and you was let down in a bite of a rope, fending yourself off the sides with one hand, carrying candle stunk in a lump of clay with the other, and clicking hold of the rope with the other hand. Ah, that's 3 of them, says Mulvaney. Must be good climate in those parts. Leroy took no heed. And then you came to a level where you crept on your hands and knees through a mile of wind and drift, and you come out into a cave place as big as Leeds Town Hall, with an engine pumping water from workings that went deeper still. It's a queer country, let alone mining, for the hills is full of those natural caves, and the rivers and the becks drop into what they call potholes, and come out again miles away. What was you doing there? Said Othris. I was a young chap then, and most went without losses, leading coal and lead iron, but at the time I'm telling on, I was driving a wagon team in the big stump. I didn't belong to that countryside by rights. I went there because of a little difference at home, and a fuss I took up with a rough lot. One night we'd been drinking, and I must have had more than I could stand, or happened the ale was none so good, though in them days, for God, I never seed bad ale. He flung his arms over his head, and gripped a vast handful of white violets. Nah, says he, I never seed the ale, and I could not drink, the bacca I could not smoke, nor the lass I could not kiss. Well, we mun have had a race home, the lot of us. I lost all the others, and when I was climbing over one of them walls built o' loose stones, I come down into the ditch, stones and all, and broke my arm. Not as I gnawed much about it, for I fell on the back of my head, and I was knocked stupid like. And when I come to myself, it were a morning, and I were lying on a settle i Jessie Rowan's house place, and Lizzie Rowan tree was setting sewing. I ached all over, and my mouth was like a lime kiln. She'd give me a drink out of the china mug with gold letters, a present from Leeds, as I looked at many a time after. You're to lie still while Dr. Warburton comes, because your arm is broken, and the father has sent a lad to fetch him. He found you when you was going to work, and carried you back on his back, says she. Oh, says I, and shut my eyes, for I felt ashamed of myself. Father's gone his work these 3 hours, and he said he'd tell him to get somebody to drive the tram. The clock ticked, and the bee come in the house, and they rung in my head like mill wheels, and she give me another drink and settled the pillow. But you're young to be getting drink and such like, but you won't do it again, will you? No, says I wouldn't if she had not but stopped these mill wheels clattering. Faith, it'd be a good thing to be nursed by a woman when you're sick, said Mulvaney. There's cheap in the price at 20 broken heads. Othris turned to frown across the valley. He had not been nursed by many women in his life. And then Dr. Warburton comes riding up, and Jessie Rowntree along with him. He was a high-larned doctor, but he talked with poor folk same as their sins. What to been a get on na? sings out he, breaking that thick head. And he felt all over me all over. It's none broken. That nobody knocked a bit sillier than ordinary, and a bit daft Ed. And so on he went, calling me all the names he could think of, but setting my arm with Jessie's help as careful as could be. Your mum let the big oaf bide here a bit, Jessie, says he, when he strapped me up and given me a dose of physic. And you and Lizzie will tend him, though he's a scarlin's worth the trouble. And that'll loose that work, says he, and that'll be upon the sick club for a couple of months and more. Doesn't that think that's a fool? But when was a young man high or low, other than a fool, I'd like to know, Mulvaney said. Sure, folly's the only safe way to wisdom, for I've tried it. Wisdom, grinned Othrys, scanning his comrades with an uplift chin. You're bloomin' Solomons, you two, ain't ye? Leroyd went on calmly, with a steady eye like an ox chewing the cud. And that was how I come to know Liza Rowntree. There's some tunes as she used to sing. She was always singing, that fetches Grnhw hill before my eyes, as fair as you can brow across there. And she would learn me to sing bass, and I was to go into the chapel with 'em, where Jessie and she led the singing, the old man playing the fiddle. He was a strange chap, old Jessie, fair mad with music, and he made me promise to learn the big fiddle when my arm was better. It belonged to him, and it stood up in a big case alongside the 8 o'clock, but Willie Satterwaite, as played it in the chapel, had gotten deaf as a doorpost, and it vexed Jessie, as he had to rap him over the head with a fiddlestick to make him give over sawing at the right time. But there was a black drop in it all, and it was a man in a black coat that brought it. When the primitive Methodist preacher came to Grnhw, he would always stop with Jessie Rowntree, and he laid hold of me from the beginning. It seemed I were a soul to be saved, and he meant to do it. And the same time I jealoused he were keen o' saving Lizen Rowntree's soul as well, and I could have killed him many a time. And this went on till one day I broke out and borrowed the brass for a drink from Liza. After 4 days I come back with my tail between my legs just to see Liza again. But Jessie were at home again with the preacher, the Reverend Almost Barcloth. Lisa said not, but a bit o' red had come to her face as were white of a regular thing. Says Jess, trying his best to be civil, Nay, lad, it's like this. You've getten to choose which way it's going to be. I had nobody across my doorstep and goes a-drinking and borrows my lass's money to spend in their drink. Hold that tongue, Liza, says he, when she wants to put a word at I were welcome to the brass, and she were none afraid that I wouldn't pay it back. Then Reverend cuts in, seeing as Jessie were lost in his temper, and they were fair beat me among them. But it were Lisa as looked as said naught, as did more than either their tongues, and so I concluded to get converted. For what? Shouted Mulvaney. Then, checking himself, he said softly, Let be. Sure, the Blessed Virgin is the mother of all religions and of most women, and there's a dale of piety in a girl if the men would only let it stay there. I have been converted myself under the circumstances. Nay, but, pursued Leroy with a blush, I mend it. Othrys laughed as loudly as he dared, having regard to his business at the time. Aye, Othrys may laugh, but you didn't know Preacher Barrowcloth, and a little white-faced chap with a voice as ud wile a bird off a bush, and a way of laying hold of folks as made 'em think they'd never have live man for a friend before. You never saw him, and you never seed Liza Rowntree. Happened it as much Liza and the preacher and her father, but always they all meant it, and I was a fair shamed o' misery. And so I become what they call the change character. And when I think on, it's hard to believe as yon chap going to prayer meetings, chapel, and class meetings were me, but I never had naught to say for myseln, though there was a deal o' shouting, and old Sammy Strother, as were almost clemmed to death and doubled up with rheumatics, would sing out, Joyful, joyful! and as it were better to go up to heaven in a coal basket than down to hell in a coach at 6. And he would put his poor old claw on my shoulder, saying, "Doesn't that feel like it, that great lump? Doesn't that feel it?" And there's sometimes I thought it did, and then again I thought it didn't. And how was that? "The everlasting nature of mankind," said Mulvaney. "Ah, and furthermore, I misdoubt you were built for the primitive Methodians. They're a new corpse anyways. I hold by the old church, for she's the mother of them all. And the father too. I like her because she's the most remarkable regimental in the fittings. I may die in Honolulu, Nova Zambra, or Cape Cayenne, but wherever I die, me for what I am, and a priest handy, I go under the same orders and the same words as the same unction, as though the Pope himself come down from the roof of St. Peter's to see me off. There's neither high nor low, nor broad nor deep, nor betwixt nor between with her, and that's what I like. But mark you, she's no manner of church for a wake man, because she takes the body and the soul of him unless he has his proper work to do. I remember when my father died, that was 3 months coming to his grave. Begad, he had sold the shebang above our heads for 10 minutes quittance of purgatory, and he did all he could, and that's why I say it takes a strong man to deal with the old church, and for that reason you'll find so many women go there, and that's the same as a conundrum.